Right, let's take a question now from Shay Smith. Shay, where are you? Off you go.
Good evening, panel. Children's mental health services are in crisis, with over 270,000 young people awaiting support in England. As a parent that waited over 2 years for a referral, what action needs to be taken to support what is fast becoming another lost generation?
Gosh, Shay, so you mentioned you were a parent of a child that's waited over 2 years for referral. Do you mind, if you're happy to, telling us a bit about that?
Yeah, so we went from probably, well, we had my youngest child bounding into school every day, head child at school, to overnight, once getting COVID, turning into a completely shadow of a self-crippling anxiety, not even being able to leave the house sometimes. 2 years waiting for CAMHS to even get a conversation led us to many frustrations. We took a private route. We were lucky that we could actually pay for private care, load up our credit cards, as many people. I dread to think of people who couldn't be in that position to do that. Went through all of that route. We're now 3 or 4 years on, and the care is patchy. It's uncoordinated. Unless you find someone who is exceptional, which we're very lucky in Bexley that we have found a very talented care worker, then I think it's completely inconsistent across the country, which really does worry me. There's still no end to this. It's every day we're dealing with it, but it could change overnight. But at the moment, I think where we worry about the lack of funding that's coming through, we worry about the fact that we just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Oh, Shay, well, look, thank you for sharing your story with us, and wish you and your family all the very best. Daisy, I mean, 2 years waiting for a referral.
Yeah. Shay, my heart goes out to you, and I'm sorry to say that your story is not a lonely one. There are thousands and thousands of families who have the same experience, and I know them from my own constituency as well, and there are many really heartbreaking stories. So we know that mental health problems set in at a very early age. And we Liberal Democrats have said for a long time we should have a mental health expert in every single primary and secondary school, because young people who go on as adults to have a long-term mental health problem, that mental health problem is normally established by the age of 14. So we've got to get a mental health expert in every primary and secondary school to do that early preventative work. We also want to see walking community hubs for mental health in every single community. That's actually something that I think every political party has supported. That was one of the only policies that every political party was supporting altogether in the last general election, and we really want to see those rolled out. We need to put an end to out-of-area placements, so young people that have very acute mental health that need to become inpatients, often they're placed 100 or 200 miles away from their families and their networks, and that doesn't help their recovery. We've got to make sure that young people can stay in their local area, and we've got to make sure that the young service, the CAMHS service for children and adolescents, actually goes all the way up to 25, so they avoid that cliff edge where the support drops away at 18. So those are just 4 tangible ways that we Liberal Democrats would really like to help solve that problem of mental health problems amongst young people.
And actually, let me just say, for those of you not familiar with the acronym, CAMHS is Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. Camilla.
I'm sorry for what you're going through. And it's not the first time I've heard that a parent talk about children just not wanting to go to school. In fact, I had that very conversation this week with a dad who cannot get both children into school. There is certainly a COVID effect here, and I don't think we can deny that. And I'm not saying this with the benefit of hindsight. At the time on The Telegraph, we campaigned during the pandemic for schools to be open. We also campaigned when it came to the COVID inquiry that was initially not going to look at the impacts on children. And we said, this is insane. We have to look at what has happened to a whole generation. I interviewed a primary school head teacher this week who was talking about the lack of preparedness that 5-year-olds are going to have now for senior school. OK, these are the children that were babies in COVID. They weren't adequately socialised, and they are coming to school, a lot of them more than would ordinarily be the case, in nappies, ill-prepared and all the rest of it. Having said all that, if you study the impacts on children of smartphones, this was happening back in around 2012. there was a slow creep of issues being suffered by children and adolescents as a result of being online. Lots of work has been done on it by a great many people, including Dr. Jonathan Haidt, who's written The Anxious Generation. You look at any of the graphs, and up they go when it comes to children suffering from anxiety, children self-harming. Something has happened that communications between, frankly, adults and children have broken down. It's not just children on screens, it's also parents on screens. The argument is that we are overprotecting them in the offline world and underprotecting them in the online world. And I think that is now coming home to roost with our children. We sort of experimented with this technology, thinking that in some way, because technology had changed, children have changed. Children haven't changed. They're as vulnerable as they've ever been. They've needed boundaries, and we are exposing them to this world that we have little or no control over. And we're now trying to put this genie back in the bottle with online safety bills and talks about whether we should be banning mobile phones. But I don't think we can underestimate the pernicious effect that smartphone use has had, and not just on one generation now. I think we're really talking about 2 or 3.
OK. And obviously what no one is making here, including Camilla, is a comment on your particular situation.
No.
Because we don't know. And we also want to reserve some privacy for your child that you're talking about. But you're talking in the general, I know, Camilla. Yes, young woman here.
So it took me a while to get in touch with the mental health services in my area. And they weren't particularly helpful at the start at all. But I can understand that because they're so overstretched and underfunded and underappreciated. And I don't think that the government really do much for them. Like, it's all well and good saying, I respect, like, the idea of mental health hubs, but where are the people coming from?
Because who are going to staff them?
Like, yeah, because there's not enough people in the NHS. There weren't enough people to deal with a lot of people that I know, so...
OK. I hear your point. Yes, 1 minute at the very back. Yeah.
Given the harm that the US tech giants... their platforms are causing our children, can we not raise the digital services tax and use the revenue to put into child mental health support? Because, yeah.
OK, yes. And with the glasses there, yes. Yes, and the blue and white top, yes.
I think this all goes back to what the government spending is targeting, because the government spending should be targeting the issues that British people are worried about, the mental health, cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, and not defence spending. So I think the Labour government really needs to take a look and essentially reflect on what the government spending is allocated on.
OK, so you'd rather see less on defence spending or more on mental health?
Yes. Richard?
Well, actually, just hearing you threw me back to a constituency case that I had. I remember seeing 2 parents at the end of their tether. I think the marriage was on the rocks as well by that point, with a really difficult case of their child, and coming to see me and working with me over a number of months to get inpatient mental health care for their daughter. And we did in the end, and she went on to recovery and all sorts of positive things. But I think, and I don't comment on your case, but I think Camilla makes an important and broader point around access to you never being able to switch off. We talk about it sometimes in the workplace, but I think actually for children it's even more ever present. It used to be a case of perhaps if children were facing problems at school, at least at the school gates the sort of issues could stop. Whereas with the always online presence of smartphones, I think is a real concern for a lot of parents. So
do you want to follow Australia's example and ban smartphones for under 16s?
I do. I want to ban smartphones in schools. I think when outside schools, I think we've got to give parents some responsibility on that. And perhaps I am up for an age limit, but I think within schools we shouldn't be having that smartphones and that constant presence. But I also think that there is a real responsibility on some of the online giants as well. I think taxing them is one thing, but I think the real thing we need to do is get the content taken offline. And some of the stuff I saw recently with one of my friends who'd had issues with her weight, and the constant reinforcement again and again and again of images of dieting and extreme things, really extreme elements of anorexia, I found really distressing, even for me, to see of an adult friend of mine. So the impact that must have on children is so strong, and which is why I think actually it's and it is through the smartphones. So I think a smartphone ban in schools is absolutely necessary.
So Darren, Labour promised to provide a specialist mental health professional in every school, rather as the Lib Dems wanted, and establish something called Young Futures Hubs, drop-in mental health support hubs, and recruit an additional 8,500 new mental health staff to treat children and adults. That was in your manifesto. Has any of that happened?
Well, we're working through the spending review now to figure out how we're going to allocate that money and how we'll be able to roll it out. I mean,
amongst all the spending cuts that we're being softened up for, is any of that realistic now?
Yeah, it is. It is. But that's why the question, when people are critical about tax changes, it raises the question, well, you need to get the money in to be able to pay for these things. We've already put £25 billion extra into the NHS, and there's going to be more coming. But look, the system is totally failing, and I'm so sorry to hear about your daughter. I mean, my second daughter's been in hospital all week, and I know how hard it is, even when they're getting the care that they need to get. I can't imagine what it must be like to know that you can't even, get the care that you need. And as a constituency MP, I've had so many cases, even where constituents who can afford to pay for private care, the private providers are full. And so they're just a complete loss. I mean, this is not what the NHS was created to do. The NHS was created to be there when you need them. And the fact is, we've got to put more money into the system. We've got to make sure we're spending that money more effectively. We've got to be hiring these additional members of staff that we need, which is what we're absolutely committed to doing. And, as we've been talking about more broadly, we've got to figure out how we stop people getting sick in the first place and not just treat people once they've gotten sick, because ultimately that's why you keep spending more and more on a whole range of different illnesses that we're trying to help people with. So it's absolutely right. We need to be thinking about how we regulate online technology companies, but also think about how we prevent people getting sick in other circumstances, and that's what we're working really hard to deliver.
Gary?
First of all, thank you. Thank you to Shay, and thank you to the lady at the front. As somebody who's had difficulties with mental health and I've written about them, it's not always easy to come out and say there's still a taboo about these things. So it's important that you talk about them. I think we need to talk about the unbelievably hostile circumstances young people face with regards to their economic futures. More and more and more young people growing up in poverty. But even aside from that, we've got people with jobs in London who are homeless. So that means if you're a young person, you know that even if you get an ordinary job, it's not going to be enough to buy a home. It's not going to be enough to have a family. So just doing the right thing, working and getting a job, it doesn't even guarantee you can feed your kids. We have to look at this. And then obviously, if you're a young person, you're thinking, well, if I don't get the best grades and I don't get to the best university, then I'm not even going to be able to have a family. What kind of world have we made here? We need to look at we always look at the individual. This person has a mental health problem. This person has a mental health problem. It doesn't come out of nowhere. These people don't just suddenly get sick. My dad worked for the post office and he had a family and he bought a house and he has a retirement, he has a pension. Kids can't get that. Kids can't get that. Unless they make millions of pounds, they can't even have a family. It's ridiculous, It's not just a problem for individuals, it's a societal problem. We need to make sure young people have economic opportunity.
Do you want to have the last word, Jim? I'm going to take another question, but let's let you have the last word.
Yes, so one thing, just following on from that, that's not necessarily been covered, that worries me is the inconsistency across the country. You can have a service in a London borough that is excelling and getting funding, and you can have the neighbouring council that's struggling. Nothing. It's that Cinderella sort of service, and that to me, I think, is getting worse.
The patchiness of the provision.
Yeah.
OK. Well, look, we thank you for asking your question. Thank you very much, Shay.